Here's a quick overview of the astrology of January. So January opens with Venus transiting from Aquarius into the sign of Pisces on January 2nd. And this is actually more important than it seems at first because Pisces is one of the signs that Venus will retrograde back to once it goes retrograde in March and April. So this ingress into Pisces is essentially the beginning of the Venus retrograde transit because in a broader sense, the Venus retrograde is a several-month transit of Venus staying in two signs of the zodiac, which is Aries and Pisces, for almost the entire first half of the year. So start paying attention to Venus retrograde things that might come up of relationships from the past or relationship issues, having to revise or revisit issues in a current relationship, and just really thinking about where you want to be going forward. That's going to intensify at the end of the month when Venus actually enters into its shadow degree, which is the degree that it will retrograde back to in April. So moving on, there's kind of a tense energy at the very beginning of the year, especially in the first few days, because we have a Mars-Pluto opposition, which goes exact on January 3rd. So this is a really tense, combative, explosive energy, and we've seen already several explosions in the news and other things like that. And in terms of people's personal lives, sometimes there can be a lot of tension that comes along with this aspect. So the good news is that the aspect starts to separate after January 3rd, especially once Mars retrogrades back into Cancer on January 6th. Then there'll be some separation between those two planets, and it'll keep getting further and further away during the course of the month. So as I said, on January 6th, Mars retrogrades back into the sign of Cancer, so it's returning back to a sign that it transited back in September through November. And this is important because Mars is going to spend the first 4 months of the year just sitting in this sign of Cancer and activating the Cancer sector of our chart, and especially whatever whole sign house Cancer coincides with in your chart. So for some people, you may have to revisit some topics that came up a few months ago in the third quarter of the year from September to November. Sometimes there can be some challenges or some conflicts in that area of our life that we have to revisit and deal with. Other times it can just be putting a large expenditure of energy into that specific area of our life or into that particular topic in our chart, and it can be stressful or it can be tiring because you're expending so much energy, but ultimately it can be for a good point, or there can be a constructive outcome to it as a result of putting that much energy into something. So pay attention to that ingress around January 6th, because that's going to be a preview of some of the retrograde themes that are going to become more prominent over the next few months, really peaking in mid-February when Mars stations direct in the sign of Cancer around 17 degrees. So moving on, after that, Mercury goes into the sign of Capricorn and departs from Aquarius on January 8th. Then this kind of starts a nice little lovely part of the month, where the Mars-Pluto aspect has separated, because that's at the beginning of the month, and this is before some other Mars oppositions build up later in the month, especially between Mercury, which is going to apply to an opposition with Mars, and the Sun, which is going to oppose Mars the following week. So that's why on January 10th, this is actually what I think is the best date of the month in order to take actions or launch new ventures. And I'm highlighting January 10th as my luckiest day of the month, especially early in the morning around 9:30 a.m. with Pisces rising. And if you cast a chart for that time, you'll have a pretty good electional astrology chart for starting new ventures and undertakings. And this chart has the moon conjoining Jupiter in the 4th house. Venus is in Pisces in the rising sign. It's a very good 4th house chart, especially for doing things related to the home or family, but also doing things from behind the scenes that aren't as upfront in the public because it's more 4th house focused. So this is my most auspicious electional chart for the month. And just a reminder that I just released my 2025 year ahead electional astrology report, where I went through and I highlight one auspicious date or one lucky date for each of the next 12 months so that you get another chart just like this, but for every other month of 2025. So I'm doing a sale on that report that lasts only until January 7th, where it's 20% off. So you can get that at theastrologypodcast.com/2025 report. All right, so this is kind of like the sweet spot in the middle of the month where we're kind of in between the tough Mars aspects at the beginning and end of the month. So then moving forward, the first lunation of the month is a full moon in the sign of Cancer, which occurs on January 13th. And this is going to bring more focus and really highlight the same area of our chart that the Mars retrograde in Cancer already started highlighting again, starting a week earlier on the 6th. So there's going to be greater attention and focus and activity in the Cancer sector of our chart, whatever house that is. The very next day, we get one of our most positive aspects of the month, which is Venus in Pisces squares Jupiter in Gemini, and creates kind of a lovely little benefic alignment of planets on that date, on January 14th. The only tricky part is that it's happening virtually at the same time as one of our other tense aspects this month, which is the Sun-Mars opposition, which occurs on the 16th. And this can be kind of a tense aspect, which can bring conflict and sort of butting heads with like another person, because oppositions are usually experienced as like an external person that you're coming into some sort of tension with. The good news, though, is this also is the halfway point in the Mars retrograde cycle. So this is usually kind of like a turning point for people in terms of whatever your experience of the Mars retrograde is, especially what was started at the beginning of the Mars retrograde when it stationed in early December. You should start to see a turning point here where some sort of resolution starts to emerge in terms of the Mars retrograde themes that have been coming up over the course of the past month and a half or so up to this point. So that's kind of good news. So moving on the 18th of January, we have a Venus-Saturn conjunction in Pisces. This can be kind of like a cold period sometimes for relationships where you can feel a cooling off or a feeling of distance in terms of emotional relationships, although sometimes it can be good for restructuring things or working on a project together with a loved one, especially if you're really focused on doing something that will be like an accomplishment for the two of you. The next day, the sun moves into Aquarius, as it always does around the 19th of January. And then right after the sun moves into Aquarius, we get a Sun-Pluto conjunction on January 21st. So Sun-Pluto conjunctions can be kind of tricky because that energy can have to do with issues of power and control, and sometimes even feelings of like manipulation and power plays. But on the other hand, it can be very good for drive and focus and becoming like really intensely throwing yourself into a project on that day. So 2 days later, we get one of our trickiest aspects of the month, definitely the trickiest one later in the month, which is the planet Mercury opposes that retrograde Mars on the 23rd of January. So Mercury-Mars oppositions are usually about verbal conflicts, like getting into a fight with somebody, saying something in the heat of the moment that you later regret is usually something to avoid and something to be cautious about. So just try to exercise greater caution in terms of verbal interactions with people on this day. And if you're experiencing like annoying emails or somebody says something hurtful, try not to go too far in terms of having that conflict, just because it could be tied in with the Mars retrograde and become a much bigger and more long-standing conflict than you might anticipate at first if you initiate something at that time. So moving forward, Mercury pretty quickly gets out of that opposition with Mars over the next few days, which is good, and it moves into Aquarius on the 27th. And then interestingly, just 2 days later, we get our second lunation of the month, which is a new moon in the sign of Aquarius. So this is really highlighting the Aquarius sector of our chart and whatever whole sign house that is. Mercury is going to form a conjunction with Pluto around that time, which can be very good as like an investigative energy where if there's something that you really want to figure out, or there's a mystery that you want to unravel, or just some hobby or some topic that you're really interested in researching, this can be a really great energy to do that under, just because Mercury is kind of like Mercury Pluto is like the archetype of the investigator, or like the Sherlock Holmes type archetype. So that's kind of the energy of that few day period on the 27th to 28th and 29th around that new moon in Aquarius. And then finally we get our last alignment of the month, which is Uranus stations direct in the sign of Taurus. And this is actually really important because this is one of the last times that Uranus is going to station direct in Taurus, where we're getting some of our final like messages or lessons about what this entire 6 or 7 year transit of Uranus going through the Taurus sectors of our chart and pushing us to have greater freedom and liberation, and sometimes destabilizing things in the Taurus sector of our chart and whatever house that coincides with. But at this point, we've probably, for the most part, gotten a sense of what that energy is about, and we're kind of winding things down at this point. And this station is crucial because after this point, Uranus is going to station at 23 Taurus, and then it's going to start moving forward again, and it's going to cruise right on into the sign of Gemini later this year, starting in July, at which point it's going to move into an entirely different sector of our chart, and it's going to initiate a new 7-year period of change and freedom and liberation in a completely new area of our life. So that's one of my main transits I talked about in my 2025 year ahead horoscopes for each rising sign. So if you'd like to understand more about how that Uranus ingress into Gemini is relevant for you and what area of your life it's going to impact, I'd recommend watching the horoscope I put out for whatever your specific rising sign is, and then you'll get a greater sense of what that transit is going to be all about. But this is pretty exciting, having that Uranus station at the very end of the month. It may bring some unexpected curveballs and some excitement or some disruptions at the end of the month, but it should be interesting nonetheless, and I'm looking forward to seeing how it goes. So, all right, I think that's it for my quick overview of the astrology of January. If you have any questions, let me know in the comments. And otherwise, be sure to check out my 2025 year ahead astrology forecast, where Austin Coppock and I went through and we gave an overview of the entirety, the sort of big picture overview of the astrology of 2025. But other than that, that's it for this quick overview. So thanks for watching. Good luck this month, and I'll see you again next month.